In the 6th century BC, new religious ideas emerged out of the prevailing social, economic, and religious conditions. Jainism and Buddhism emerged as the two most important religious sects. We have covered Jainism in the last lecture. If you have been following my channel, you will know that we have already completed Jainism, and today we will focus upon Buddhism, how it emerged and spread and developed as a prominent religious sect in the 6th century BCE. Now, Buddhism. We know that Buddhism was founded by Gautam Buddha, and of all the religious preachers of the 6th century BC, Buddha is the best known. His religion had a more popular social base. Gautam Buddha, or Siddhant as we know him, as was his original name, was a contemporary of Mahavir. According to tradition, he was born in 563 BC in a Shakya Kshatriya family in Lumbini in Nepal near Kapilvastu. His father, Sudodhan, seems to have been the elected ruler of Kapilvastu and headed the Shakya Republican clan. His mother, Maya, was a princess from the Koshalan dynasty. As his mother had died soon after his birth, he was brought up by his maternal aunt and stepmother, Prajapati Gautami. At the age of 16, he was married to Yashodhara, the daughter of a neighboring chieftain, and had a son, Rahul. Throughout his life, uh, his life was spent in royal splendor, and this royal splendor, however, failed to attract his mind, and as traditions describe, he was deeply affected by the sight of an old man, a sick man who was diseased and suffering, and a dead body, all of which deeply depressed him because they showed that there is nothing but sorrow and suffering in the world and death comes to all of us. Finally, he saw an ascetic who devoted himself to religion, and this sort of life, the life of asceticism, appealed to him, and therefore he left his palace at night at the age of 29 to seek mental peace in the homeless life of an ascetic. He spent 6 years as a wandering ascetic, and from a sage named Alar Kalam, he learned the technique of meditation and teachings of the Upanishad. But these teachings did not lead him to final liberation, and in the course of his renunciation or asceticism, he practiced rigid austerities and resorted to different kinds of self torture to find the truth. Ultimately, he went to Uruvela near modern Bodh Gaya on the banks of Niranjana river and sat under a peepal tree. Here he attained the supreme knowledge or enlightenment on the 49th day of his continuous meditation. Since then he was called the Buddha, that is the enlightened one. From here he proceeded to the deer park at Sarnath near Varanasi and gave his first sermon, which is known as Dharma Chakra Pravartan, that is setting in motion the wheel of Dharma. Among his first 5 disciples were Asujit, Upali, Mogalana, Sariputra, and Anand. Buddha also laid the foundations of the Buddhist Sangha, and he preached most of his sermons at Sarnath. Soon he started visiting various places to propagate his sermons, which took him to Sarnath, Mathura, Rajgir, Gaya, and Patliputra. He also visited Kapilvastu and converted his foster mother and his son Rahul to his faith. Kings like Bimbisar and Ajatashatru of Magad, Prasenjit of Koshal, and Udayan of Koshambi accepted the Buddha's doctrines and became his disciples. And finally, at the age of 80 in 483 BCE, the Buddha died at Kushinagar, the capital of the Mallas. Now, when we have looked into the early life history and how Buddha received enlightenment, we will now move on to the teachings of Buddha, which we are going to talk in detail. Now, when we talk about the teachings of the Buddha, the first thing uh, that comes to prominence is the Four Noble Truths. In the course of his renunciation, in the course of his search for truths, Buddha discovered that there are four noble truths which every individual needs to realize. Now, what are these four noble truths? The first noble truth is that the world is full of sufferings. Second, all sufferings have a cause, that is desire. Desire is the cause of all sufferings of the world. Ignorance and attachment, these are the causes of suffering. The third noble truth is that the suffering could be removed by destroying the cause, that is desire. And in order to end sufferings, one must know the right path. This path is the Eightfold Path, or as we know it as the Ashtangika Marg. So this leads us to the second philosophy of Buddhism, which is Ashtangika Marg, or the Eightfold Path, which consists of the following principles: right view, right aim, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. We will try to describe each of these um, paths in a little detail. What does right view means? It is to understand that the world is filled with sorrow generated by desire, and the ending of desire will lead to the liberation of the soul. Right aim. It seeks to avoid the enjoyment of the senses and luxury, and aims to love humanity and increase the happiness of others. Right speech. It seeks to emphasize the speaking of truth always. Right action is understood to be unselfish action. Right livelihood instructs that a man should live by honest means. Right effort. It is the proper way of controlling one's senses so as to prevent bad thoughts. Right mindfulness is the understanding of the idea that the body is impermanent, and meditation is the means for the removal of worldly evils. And finally, right concentration. The observation of it will lead to peace, and meditation will unravel the real truth. Then we come to Buddha's doctrine of karma. Buddhism laid great emphasis on the law of karma, and according to this law, present is determined by the past actions, and the condition of a man in this life and the next depends upon his actions. Every individual is the maker of his own destiny. We are born again and again to reap the fruits of our karma, and if an individual has no sins, he is not born again. Thus, the doctrine of karma is the essential part of the teachings of Buddha. Then we come to the next teaching, which is Nirvana. Buddha preached Nirvana, the ultimate goal in the life of a man. It means shedding of all desires and ending of sufferings, which finally leads to freedom from rebirth. And a process of elimination of desire, one can attain Nirvana. Uh, and the next philosophy of Buddhism was that the Buddha did not believe in the existence of soul. According to the Buddha, life is constantly changing, and all conditioned things are transient. And whatever is transient is painful, and where change and sorrow prevail, the question of a permanent immortal soul does not arise. Buddha went on to emphasize on the spirit of love, and love could be expressed on all living beings by following ahimsa, or non-killing. Buddha also expounded the transcendental philosophy of universal brotherhood and equality in all respects. Then he talked about the middle path. What was the middle path? Buddha preached that an individual should pursue the middle path, and both severe asceticism as well as luxurious life are to be avoided. In Buddhism, salvation lay in one's own good deeds. So there was no need of a priest or a middleman to achieve nirvana, that is the ultimate goal of truth. And at the same time, we find that Buddha also rejected the authority of the Vedas and condemned animal sacrifices, and he protested against the complicated and meaningless rituals. These were basically the teachings of the Buddha. Now, when we talk of Buddhism, the next important aspect is about the Sangha, or the monastery which the Buddha established. And the Sangha, the Buddhist Sangha, became an important instrument for the spread of Buddhism uh, significantly. So let us talk about the Buddhist Sangha. Now, the Sangha was the religious order of the Buddhists. It was a well-organized and powerful institution which popularized Buddhism. Membership was normally open to all persons irrespective of caste above 15 years of age. Initially, Buddha was not in favor of admitting women in the Sangha, but he admitted them at the repeated requests of his chief disciple Anand and his foster mother Mahaprajapati Gautami. Now, the Sangha has also promoted education among the people, and unlike Brahmanism, people of different orders of the society had entry to education. Thus, education reached wider sections of the society. The Sangha was also governed by democratic principles, and there was a code of conduct for the monks and nuns, and they were bound to obey it. Among the most famous bhikkhus or monks at the time of the Buddha were Sariputra, Moggallana, Anand, Mahakasapa, Anuruddha, Upali, and Rahul. Now, let us see how the Buddhist scriptures were compiled. As we know, the sacred scriptures of the Buddhists were written in Pali, and in the days of the Buddha, Pali was the spoken language of Magad. And since the Buddha spoke in Pali, the Pali canon is regarded as the most authentic version of the Buddha word. So the Buddhist scriptures in Pali are commonly referred to as three pitak or threefold basket, which consists of the Sutta Pitak, the Vinay Pitak, and the Abhidhamma Pitak. Let us see these three pitaks in a little detail. Now, Sutta Pitak, it consists of 5 sections or Nikayas of religious discourses and sayings of the Buddha. So, the 5 Nikayas are Digha Nikaya, Majjhim Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttar Nikaya, and Khudak Nikaya. And as I said, it consists of the religious discourses and sayings of the Buddha. Now, the Vinay Pitak. Vinay Pitak mainly deals with rules and regulations which the Buddha promulgated for the discipline of the order of monks, that is bhikkhus, and nuns, that is bhikkhunis. And it also describes in detail the gradual development of the Sangha. Abhidhamma Pitak contains the philosophical ideas and of teachings of the Buddha, and it is also a significant section of the Buddhist scriptures. Now, when we talk about the spread of Buddhism, we find that 4 Buddhist councils were held at different periods of time which contributed to the spread of Buddhism. Let us look into the 4 Buddhist councils. So, the first Buddhist council, it was held in 483 BCE at Rajgriha under the presidentship of Mahakasapa, and it was patronized by Ajatashatru. The significance of the first Buddhist council was that all the teachings of the Buddha were divided into 2 pitaks, namely the Vinay Pitak and the Sutta Pitak. So initially the Sutta Pitak and Vinay Pitak were compiled. The text of Vinay Pitak was established under the leadership of Upali, and those of Sutta Pitak were settled under the leadership of Anand. Second Buddhist council, 383 BC at Vaishali, under the presidency of Sabakami and patronized by Kalashok. The monks of Vaishali and Patliputra accepted certain rules which were declared as contrary to the teachings of Buddha by the monks of Kaushambi and Avanti. So the council failed to bring about a compromise between the 2 opposing groups, and ultimately it ended in a permanent split of the Buddhist order into Sthavirvadins and Mahasanghikas. So the Sthavirvadins, they followed strict monastic life and rigid disciplinary laws as originally prescribed, and the group which followed modified disciplinary rules was called the Mahasanghikas. Now the third Buddhist council, 250 BC at Patliputra, presided over by Moggaliputta Tissa, and the patron was Ashoka. In this council, the philosophical interpretations of the doctrines of Buddha were collected into the third Pitak, which came to be known as the Abhidhamma Pitak, and an attempt was made in this council to free the Buddhist order from the dissidents and innovations. And tradition says that heretical monks numbering 60,000 were expelled from the order. And finally, we come to the fourth Buddhist council held in 72 AD at Kashmir, presided over by Vasumitra and patronized by the then king, Kushana king, Kanishka. Now, the Convening of the Fourth Buddhist Council led to the division of Buddhism into two broad sects, namely the Mahayana and the Hinayan. And in opposition to the group who believed in the orthodox teaching of Buddha, that is the Hinayan sect, those who accepted the new ideas were called the Mahayana sect. And the Mahayanas made an image of Buddha and worshipped it as God. All right, so after the four Buddhist councils, we have seen how Buddhism spread. Let us talk a little more about how Buddhism expanded and developed. So, we will look into the factors which contributed to the popularity of Buddhism. First of all, uh, Buddhism was basically liberal and democratic in nature, and the ideas of social equality laid down in the codes of Buddhism made many lay followers accept Buddhism, and it appealed to the common people and particularly won the support of the lower orders because it attacked the rigidities of the Varna system. The personality of the Buddha, secondly, and the method adopted by him to preach his religion also helped the spread of Buddhism. He sought to fight evil by goodness and hatred by love. Then the use of the popular language Pali to explain the doctrines also helped in the spread of the religion. And this was because the Brahmanical religion had limited itself to the use of Sanskrit, which was not the language of the masses. Another important reason was that the institution of the Sangha had helped to organize the spread of Buddhism effectively. The doors of the Sangha were open to all, irrespective of caste, creed, and sex. And as a result of organized preaching under the auspices of the Sangha, Buddhism spread widely. Now, Buddhism also received royal patronage. For example, according to tradition, Ashoka's period proved to be a turning point in the history of Buddhism. He preached and propagated Buddhism in and outside India. Then later on, we find Menander, who was the Indo-Greek king, and Kanishka, who was the Kushana king. They also popularized Buddhism. In fact, we have seen how Kanishka was the patron of the fourth Buddhist council that had been held in Kashmir in 72 AD. Now, there are many saint scholars who made an immense contribution to the Buddhist philosophy and religion. And when we talk of the saint scholars, mention may be made here of Ashwaghosh, Nagarjun, Asang, Vasubandhu, Buddha Ghosh, Buddha Palit, and Bhav Vivek. Now, we know for sure that Buddhism spread and developed widely on a large scale. But then we find that Buddhism, which had originated in India, gradually was declining, and ultimately we find that it almost completely disappeared. Now, let us look into the reasons uh, that led to the decline of Buddhism in the later years. So, by the 12th century, Buddhism virtually had become extinct in India, and let us talk about the causes. So, the first important cause of the decline of Buddhism was the destructive changes which came within Buddhism. At the outset, we find that every religion is inspired by the spirit of reform, but eventually it succumbs to the rituals and ceremonies it originally denounces. So, Buddhism also underwent a similar metamorphosis, and it became a victim to the evils of Brahmanism against which it had fought initially. And Buddhism changed for the worse. Gradually, the Buddhist monks, they were cut off from the mainstream of the people's lives. They gave up Pali, the language of the people, took to Sanskrit, the language of the intellectuals. And then we find that, particularly with the emergence of Mahayanism, the practice of idol worship also began on a large scale. Secondly, Sangha, which was the main instrument for the propagation and spread of Buddhism, that also declined. Buddhist monasteries or Buddhist Sanghas received rich offerings, which made the lives of monks easy. And by the 7th century, we find that the Buddhist monasteries had come to be dominated by ease loving people, and they had become centers of corrupt practices. And as the Sangha had been the heart of Buddhism, so the decline of the Sangha naturally amounted to the decline of the latter. Then there was the revival of Brahmanical religion, the Brahmanical religious pressure. which was an important factor that contributed to the decline in the popularity of Buddhism. And now, Buddhism was now popularized in a modified way, with emphasis on devotion to gods and not on sacrifices as it earlier was. And it absorbed many of the reformist teachings of the Buddha, like ahimsa. And Hinduism, even or Brahmanism, even recognized the Buddha as an avatar of Vishnu. And in South India, particularly in Tamil Nadu, we find that the Bhakti movement contributed to the decline of Buddhism and the revival of the Brahmanical religion based on bhakti, temple, and image worship. So that was also one of the reasons. Now, a very important reason which has been attributed to the decline of Buddhism is the alleged persecution of Buddhism. So, the decline of Buddhism is often attributed to persecution. For example, according to tradition, the Brahmin ruler Pushyamitra Shunga is said to have persecuted the Buddhists. The Hun king Mihir Kul, who was a worshipper of Shiv, he killed hundreds of Buddhists. The Shaivite Shashank of God, he is said to have persecuted the Buddhists. And in South India, both the Shaivites and Vaishnavites bitterly opposed the Jains and Buddhists in the early medieval times. And in any event, by the 12th century, Buddhism had virtually disappeared from the land of its birth. But despite the fact that Buddhism had declined and gradually vanished from the place of its origin, place of its birth, we cannot negate the fact that Buddhism has contributed immensely to Indian culture, literature, and philosophy. Let us talk about the contribution of Buddhism. Now, Buddhism, first of all, stood for a religious system which was accessible to all classes of people, and it laid great emphasis on the ethical code and good conduct and character as the basis of religion. Buddhism helped to mitigate the evils resulting from the new material life of the 6th century BC, to consolidate social changes, and to improve the position of women and Shudras. The concept of ahimsa, that is non-injury to all living things, was its great contribution. Buddhism gave a boost to cattle wealth at a time when they were killed for food by the non-Aryans and for propitiating the gods by the Aryans. Then the monastic system introduced by the Buddhists, that is the Sangha system, it served as a model for others. And the establishment of Buddhist monasteries also helped the spread of education. And as they admitted all classes of people, education was no longer confined to the top few. Buddhism also contributed a vast body of Pali literature, like the Tripitaka, Sutta Pitak, Vinay Pitak, and Abhidhamma Pitak. And we also know about the Buddhist contributions to Tamil literature. For example, of the five great Tamil epics, two belong to the Buddhists, Manimekalai and Kundalakesi. Then you have great luminaries like Vasubandhu, who made rich contributions to literature. Buddhist contributions to Indian philosophy, logic, and metaphysics are also profound. Great Buddhist thinkers like Nagarjuna, Ashokghosh, Vasubandhu, and Dharmakirti were renowned thinkers and writers on logic and metaphysics. Buddhism, the contributions of Buddhism to art and heritage of India are also remarkable. We have the spectacular stupas, viharas, and chaityas that were built in places like Sanchi, Bharut, Bodh Gaya, Takshila, Amravati, Nalanda, and a number of places. And similarly, we have the Buddhist cave temples at Ajanta, Karle, Ellora, etc., which show their achievements in cave architecture. So, Buddhist art forms a glorious chapter in the history of Indian art. And finally, Buddhism proved to be one of the greatest civilizing forces which India gave to the neighboring countries. Buddhism broke the isolation of India and established an intimate contact between India and foreign countries. Indian culture and civilization was carried by the Buddhist missionaries into China, Mongolia, Manchuria, Korea, Japan, Burma, Java, Sumatra, and other countries from the time of Ashoka. So, this is where we stop talking about Buddhism. We have covered almost everything about the origin, about the teachings of the Buddha, how it spread, ultimately how it declined and disappeared from the place of its origin. What we can conclude is that the new religious sects which emerged in the 6th century BC, Buddhism and Jainism, became very popular among the people, and they put emphasis on Buddhism put emphasis on humanity, moral life, karma, ahimsa, etc. It was highly critical of the caste system, domination of the Brahmanas, animal sacrifices, and the ideas of God, and was a direct challenge to the existing Vedic religion. So, all we can say is that all these brought about a significant change in the attitude of the people, and they, as a result, began to question the age long supremacy of the Brahmanical religion. So, as a civilizing force, as one of the greatest civilizing forces in India, Buddhism made significant contributions to contemporary society and also the lives of the people. Now, I hope this video helps you. And if you have liked the video, please share it with others. And if you're not subscribed to my channel, please do so. Thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you.